Let's get into our first topic now. Should we let asylum seekers work if they are stuck waiting for their application to be accepted or rejected? Get your calls in now. According to researchers, letting asylum seekers work after just 6 months could grow the economy by a further £1 billion, raise £800 million in tax revenue and reduce their reliance on taxpayer support for accommodation and essential items. Currently, asylum seekers can only start working if their application has taken longer than 12 months to complete through no fault of their own. Campaigners want to halve that time period so that they can start working sooner. It sounds like common sense, Charlie. If we've got this potent force, if you like, workforce just waiting to do something, why not make them part of society and contribute?
Well, the key part of that is saying that you could only work after 12 months. So if your application hasn't been processed after 12 months. So the question is, why is your application not being processed within a 12-month period? That is a complete failure of the system. It should be completed even before 6 months. So the reality is, when you have people that come into the country, if they're seeking asylum or if they're a refugee or if they have a claim, that claim needs to be processed in a quicker turnaround. It needs to have a determination. And if your claim is denied, then I'm afraid you're not going to be able to stay in the UK or the country anyway. The idea that after 6 months, as opposed to 12 months, you're allowing people to work gives you perhaps more of a claim than what you might have had before you've actually entered the country in the first place, which just increases the population. We don't have the public services. You don't have the housing. I understand the idea that it could be an extra £4 billion could be appetising for the Treasury, particularly when you don't have the money in the coffers as it is. However, notwithstanding the idea that you need to fund public services, that you have more people in the country, that will actually cost the taxpayer and the economy even more. So it's not as ideal. I
don't agree with that at all. I think that, you know, I saw a tweet yesterday, and I see so many like this, actually. They're just lazing around in hotels, and we need to change this nasty rhetoric and narrative against asylum seekers, that they're sat around waiting. They don't want to be sat around waiting. They are desperate to work. And if you let me finish, and the fact is, if they can contribute up to nearly £1 billion to our economy and save taxpayers' money, I say that's a win-win situation. We should be letting them work. We're the slowest country in the world, I think, that we're keeping them waiting 12 months or more. And your point about the backlog is irrelevant right now. The point is, let's get them working. It is, because we're not talking about that.
Because
the question is, shall we let them work?
No,
and
it's
if you've
not.
got people sat around waiting, we've got talented people locked up in hotel rooms.
Well, they're not locked up in hotel rooms. They're not locked up in hotel rooms.
And we're not actually using them. We've got labour shortages. We've got huge labour shortages, and we need people working. And also, we need to grow our population, and we need a working age population.
What you need,
situation.
Before you get into any of that, you need to determine whether somebody has the right to be in the country in the first place.
Most are already passed.
Well, hold on.
Most do pass.
Yes, exactly.
Most do.
Exactly, because the government is...
Over 70-80% actually pass.
Exactly.
To get them working.
Well, hold on, because that's the question about how the backlog is being busted. And that's a problem, because people are coming into the country. The system is overloaded. People are being given that right to sort of stay in the UK, when actually...
Can I ask you a question, actually?
Sure.
So the Ukrainians, you know, population of millions and millions, 37 million, 200,000 came, and they were given every right. They were given the immediate right to work. There was no problem with that.
Sure.
OK, we can allow 200,000 Ukrainians to work.
Right too,
but
because there's a war going on.
But yes, and there's wars going on, and the 30,000 people suddenly are a problem to the economy and to the housing. But 200,000 Ukrainians were in a problem.
Because it's about safe and legal routes. And we always have this question about, you know, the government deciding, or there aren't the safe and legal routes for people that are seeking refuge and people that are particularly in those small boat crossings. But there are, because we've just talked about Ukraine. Well, that is a safe and legal route.
That's because we created that.
Exactly.
We can recreate
so it's a safe and legal route.
No,
well,
and we're not creating for the small boats.
Safe and legal routes don't exist in the same way for people from Afghanistan, from Iran.
They do. They do. The last government, did create safe and legal routes because there's a scheme for Ukrainians.
And actually that failed.
Let me finish. Let me give you the list. Let me give you the list.
No, because that's not correct.
It's not been stopped.
The Afghan scheme had been stopped. It has.
But there has been a scheme for Afghanistan's. There was a screen for Ukrainians. There were a scheme for Syrians. If you just let me give you the list: Ukrainians, people from Afghanistan, people from Syria, and people from Hong Kong. So there have been safe and legal routes created by successive governments. We can have a whole conversation about whether there should be more safe and legal routes for particular countries. That's a whole other topic.
Well, I did say that. We're talking about letting them
the fact is, there are safe and legal routes, and it's for the governments to decide. But I'm just correcting the record because it is a fact.
Narinder, one thing that we see is when asylum claims are rejected, actually the number of enforced deportations is quite small. Most of them are voluntary. People leave voluntarily to go home. So if you give somebody a job, how likely are they then to go home voluntarily? If we are managing to get people home again because they choose to do it, give them a job. Isn't that another reason to stay in the UK?
I don't think it's a strong enough reason.
Deserve to be here. They shouldn't be.
I don't think that's so strong because there's no credible evidence that we can't get them back home either. There's not enough credible evidence of that. And the fact is, the credible evidence is that research has shown we need money in the coffers. We don't want to be taking money out.
Once an asylum claim has been rejected, a huge percentage stay in the country anyway. And then we have that job to try and find them and try and either enforce them or suggest they need to go.
But that percentage is so small compared to what they could contribute to the economy. You're arguing about a tiny little small percentage as opposed to arguing actually, and the problem is the British public actually don't have a problem with immigration. What they have a problem with is people sitting around. They have a problem. If you let me finish, they have a problem. No, they don't. They have a problem.
Absolutely do. It's the number one issue in the country. Illegal immigration is a problem.
That's because of the way the media, the rhetoric going around it, and it's all lies.
But isn't part of the problem that people have with asylum seekers in their communities is that they see them waiting, doing nothing. If you take that workforce, and say, look, while we're here, we're going to contribute, would you not find communities responding overwhelmingly positive to those people who choose to contribute?
I think if you're absolutely right. If you're coming into the country, if you're processed in the proper way, if you are given asylum, and if you are seeking refuge, and if you're approved to be in the UK, then absolutely you should be making that contribution, getting to it post haste. But what people,
there you go.
But that's if you're allowed to be, not sitting around.
But you're allowed to be here during the process, and during that process,
and that process is too long.
I choose to be in this country. I will contribute while this process is taking place, and then you have people engaging with their co-workers, explaining their stories, and that division doesn't exist in the same way.
And also, they'll be integrating, and they'll be
because it's about...
Absolutely. And there is absolutely no problem if people have a right to come into the UK. We open our hearts, we open our homes to people that need to be here, that are fleeing persecution, prosecution, that absolutely need to have the refuge in the United Kingdom. That is part of our DNA. What isn't part of our DNA is the lack of fairness or unfairness. You know, we are a very, very fair country. And when you see people where there is no deterrent anymore for people taking part in these small boat crossings that come into the country illegally, that all of a sudden, without a deterrent...
It's not illegal.
It is
We're
illegal.
not going to get into that.
The very final thing, because without a deterrent, then all of a sudden if you say, oh, yes, you can work within 6 months, that is a pull factor.
There's no credible evidence. There's no credible evidence. There's no credible evidence.
It will be.
You've got no evidence.
More people will come. More people will come. We've had record numbers. We've had record numbers of people.
When you talk over each other,
record numbers of people have come into the UK.
No one can hear your arguments. Let's hear from Danny's in London. Danny, tell me, do you think allowing asylum seekers to work earlier in the process would be a good thing? What do you reckon?
Generally, yes. I think it ain't a bad thing. I don't think it's right that these guys and girls that they should be just sitting there and doing nothing. So I'll give you an example. For in Birmingham, right? Okay, the bin men are striking for a reason, but they're in trouble, aren't they? They've got, they've got rubbish just building up. So why not give these guys and girls a temporary licence so that they can go to Birmingham? Let's get some buses out. Let's get it cleaned up. Let's not put it down to the army.
OK, so what you're suggesting, Danny...
Just sitting in hotels doing nothing, and we're paying for it.
OK, so what you're suggesting, Danny, is that people come all the way from Afghanistan, make the huge effort to get here, possibly risking their own lives, and then we turn them into strike breakers. We actually are turning them as people to break industrial disputes which are based on improving pay and conditions.
I can understand what you're saying, which I agree with you there, but at the end of the day, something needs to be done. We've got a lot of young men and women sitting there doing nothing. where we've got problems in the country where they could help us out.
I mean, this sounds like rather than community payback, it's community pay forward, saying, look, I want to be here, so I choose to invest in the community that I would love to be part of. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. I think that, you know, if you showed the incentive that you're happy enough to get out there and do something rather than just sit in an hotel and do nothing, then why not? You could extend that NI number. Why not?
OK, listen, thank you for your call. Let's take another one. Margaret's in Cornwall. Margaret, what do you reckon? Get asylum seekers working early, knit them into the communities that they want to be part of. Does it make sense to you?
Well, and I think it's with what's going on in the world these days. I can't understand why they're in hotels and not in barracks or ex-holiday camps or places like that, and given some military training while they're here.
OK.
If they come here and they go to barracks, holiday camps, and if repairs need doing on the holiday camps, the barracks, or if we put them in the sand huts or what have you, where, like I say, they can have some training and maybe doing a bit of social work where things are needed. And I think maybe that should be it. And also, if they come here, that they know their families will not be able to come in. If they come here to work and eventually work if they're accepted, but they know their families won't be able to come in.
OK, isn't that depriving them of one of their human rights, though? If they are allowed to stay here, but their families aren't allowed to join them, that they are then separated from their families, possibly for life?
No, because I worked with a Polish guy for several years, and he went home to his family every sort of about 6 weeks a year. He went back home to his family, and my husband worked in the Merchant Navy. He was never around when children was young, and he'd be away for up to 9 months at a time.
OK. Thanks for your call, Margaret. We'll take one more. Adam's in the West Midlands. Adam, you know, do you come into contact with asylum seekers? Would you like to see them gainfully employed, helping us all out?
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, I just wanted to point out a couple of key points here. Number one, my relatives employ immigrants. I mean, I'll tell you something. I can prove it to you. Nobody can, absolutely nobody works. It's in their blood. It's naturally hard-working. The most hard-working people on this earth are migrants. I can tell you with my own, and it's unbelievable. It's just a lot of natural talent. Number two, I just wanted to point out something. I'm not a lawyer, but I think if lawyers should be looking at this, because especially on the TV you hear about boats and even not only boats, genuine migrants. A lot of the migrants that come to this country, and especially on the boats, are a majority of them are from either a Commonwealth country. If they're not from a Commonwealth country, they're from a British Empire country. If they're not from a British Empire country, it'll be a former British protectorate or a former British governorate country, or a former British colony. Yeah. So just on that, if you're a lawyer, just on that, I'm sure on legal grounds, the government could get themselves done by just kicking them out and using language, because they can automatically qualify under the Commonwealth.
What I think you're saying is that we have a colonial responsibility because of what we've done over hundreds and hundreds of years to try and accept people into the country. We have limits, though, don't we, Narinder? We can't accept everybody whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents may have been affected by what our ancestors did.
It's not even that. It's just it's wars going on now. Yep. You know, our foreign policy has clearly failed because all it's caused is immigration to come all over Europe, all over the world. And actually, yes, we do. If we bombed these countries and displaced people from their homes and killed some of their family members, yes, I think we've got a little bit of a responsibility to take them in now and help them.
That's why there was a scheme in terms of Afghanistan and Syria, because the UK had involvement in those conflicts.
I'm not going to talk over you. I'm not going to argue that.
Because it's true.
No, because it's not.
But all we're saying is that if people want to come to the UK, if they are fleeing persecution, if there's a right to be, of course they will come here. Of course they'll be welcome here, and of course they should be working and integrated.
It's just what happens during that process.
But it's during the process which takes too long, and it's illegal immigration, which people really get uptight about.
Listen, thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for all your calls.